I didn't see Joan for the rest of the day. English was the only class we had together. But when the final bell rang, I gathered my books and ran to meet her for the walk home. She wasn't waiting for me at the picnic tables on the east side of campus, and she'd been waiting there every day as long as we'd been in high school. I didn't stick around. I knew she wouldn't be coming. I knew what had happened even before I really knew it, if that makes sense, so I wasn't surprised when I came around the building and saw her sliding into Johnny's Merc. I called out to her, but she didn't wait. She didn't even turn around. The shouting match next door went on longer than usual that evening, and though I stayed awake until well after midnight, Joan never showed up at my window. I didn't see her until we walked to school the next morning, and then only briefly because we hadn't gone a block before Johnny's Merc rolled up to the sidewalk, and he reached over to crank down the window. "Anybody want to ride to school?" he asked. "I do," Joan said brightly, opening the door. The interior of the car gleamed, every bit as glossy as the exterior. The lavender dash, the chrome-framed gauges on the instrument panel. The radio was pumping out Chuck Berry, Maybelline. Johnny flashed that reckless grin at Joan. I might as well have been wallpaper. So when Johnny said, "Coming, Nancy," I shook my head and turned away. "I'll walk." "Suit yourself," Johnny said, and Joan wound up the window as they pulled away from the curb. She hadn't even said goodbye. I put my head down and hurried on alone. By the time we'd moved on to Idols of the King and Mrs. Guest's class, we were reading the part where Vivian imprisons Merlin in the tree. That faraway look in Joan's eyes had faded. There were no more weird incidents with Tom, and she had rededicated herself to infuriating her father by dating Johnny Fabriano. That was all anyone could talk about. 5 years after his premature departure from high school, tales of Johnny's exploits lingered. Among other things, he was said to have raided the school at midnight to steal a carbon copy of Mr. Dunnigan's chem final, fought a legendary bruiser named Otis, now serving time in the state pen, to a blood-spitting draw, and invited Master Sergeant Ashton, the junior ROTC teacher, who had stormed the beach at Okinawa to go fuck himself. So every eye was upon her when Joan stepped out of Johnny's flame-bedizened ride. Mr. Hayden soon put a stop to that. He started driving her to school himself, but I knew that Joan was still seeing Johnny on the sly. More than once I woke to the guttural rumble of his car in a neighboring street and knew that she'd availed herself of her arboreal exit. She certainly wasn't using it to visit me, so I didn't see much of Joan for a while. I walked to school and back alone. We couldn't talk during English, and while she still ate lunch at our table, half a dozen other girls did too. It was hardly the place for confidences. Aside from a chance encounter in the girls' bathroom, and even that was fleeting, we might have been little more than casual acquaintances. "Do you still think about it?" I asked as we stood in front of the rusty mirrors. "Think about what?" she said. "Bugtown." She didn't answer right away. When she did, she said, "Sometimes it seems like it's the only thing I can think about." Then a gaggle of chattery sophomores burst through that door. Of course, Joan wasn't the only point of interest that fall. As October deepened, the town turned its attention to high school football. Tam was enjoying a record-breaking season, sometimes piling up more than 200 yards a game, and his quarterback, an alien kid named Steven, who ran a little on the small side at 6'10", was throwing the ball with the kind of pinpoint accuracy you didn't usually see outside the NFL. The Bears often bested their opponents by 40 points or more, and they could have doubled those numbers if Coach Pack hadn't routinely pulled Tam and Theben out of the game at halftime. "It didn't seem sporting to keep running up the score," he told the Milledgeville Courier. The aliens attended every game. The adults kept to sections C and D, but their kids stood in the spirit section and stomped in enthusiasm, occasionally ramming a taloned foot right through the metal risers. And you often ran into them at the concession stand. They were especially fond of chili dogs, ordering them by the dozen with mustard and onions, and sucking them whole into those flappy mouths, like sucking ping pong balls into the nozzle of a vacuum cleaner. Their table manners were generally atrocious, though I always assumed that by their own standards, they were probably perfectly acceptable. They wore form-fitting knee-length pants, perhaps out of deference to human sensibilities, perhaps not, but otherwise went naked and barefoot. Their first few days at Milledgeville High, they were constantly being sent home for violating the dress code. But when a delegation of alien parents arrived to ask that the principal exempt their children, he capitulated, Maybe because he was sitting across his desk from a party of large green monsters from outer space. And maybe because modesty wasn't really an issue since no one could tell the male and female aliens apart except by their human names. And even then, who could really say for sure? Maybe they had 3 sexes, or 6, or none at all. They were a weird bunch, taken all together. They were aliens, but they sure had improved Milledgeville's lousy football team. The homecoming game, the usual route, ended around 8. The dance got underway an hour later. Everybody boogied to gumdrop, the aliens in a herky-jerky rhythm that seemed to have nothing to do with that of the song. The humans, most of them, on beat. But when the DJ spun "Take Me Back," the alien kids surrendered the floor to their human counterparts. I heard this all secondhand, of course. I wasn't there. Plain old Nancy had no date. Just as I wasn't there to see what happened in the parking lot outside. I heard Joan's account that night, and I would later hear Johnny Fabriano's version of events. But I never knew Joan to lie, so I'm confident of that part of the story. My understanding of Tom's motives, on the other hand, to the extent that he had motives, and they can be understood, is the product of pure conjecture. And it may be that I'm too rooted in a human perspective to speculate with any accuracy. What I know for sure is that Joan had been forbidden to attend both the game and the dance. But Joan was not going to be denied the night out. She couldn't attend the game. Some Pentecostal ally of her father would betray her, and she couldn't attend the dance because the chaperones wouldn't admit someone Johnny's age, and especially not Johnny himself. But she could make it a special night, and when she slipped out the window around 8:30, that's just what she intended to do. Apparently, Johnny had the same idea. His car was idling a block over, and when she slid in beside him, he had a corsage waiting. They were going to celebrate homecoming on their own, he said, and if his hand lingered when he pinned the flower to her breast, she attributed it to his clumsy fingers. Johnny'd also bought a couple of bottles of sweet wine. Joan had never tasted the stuff, but she wasn't going to decline another opportunity to defy her father. Besides, it turned out she liked the giddy feeling it gave her. The devil-may-care release from the inhibitions that her Pentecostal childhood had instilled within her. She was pleasantly buzzed by the time they pulled into the school parking lot, a destination Joan had insisted on over Johnny's objections. "Let's go to the dance," she'd said, giggling, and when Johnny pointed out that they couldn't go to the dance, she leaned over and planted a lingering kiss on the tender spot just behind his ear. "We can get close," she whispered, an enticingly ambiguous statement, which is how they wound up parked in the darkest corner of the high school parking lot. The radio was playing the Four Aces, Melody of Love, when Johnny leaned in to kiss her, and Joan later told me how she remembered the music and the taste of the sweet wine on his lips. It wasn't the first time they had kissed, but it was the first time it really seemed to matter, and she surrendered herself to it. Johnny slid one hand up Joan's ribs to caress her breast. When she didn't protest, when indeed she seemed to lean into him, he let the other hand drift down to push its way between her thighs. This wasn't what Joan wanted. It never had been. But Johnny'd been intending to claim this prize for more than a month now. So when Joan protested, murmuring, "No, Johnny," he simply ignored her. He was tugging at her panties when she said it again. "No, Johnny!" And by the time she said it a third time, he'd nearly wormed a finger inside them. Joan gasped. She tried to thrust Johnny away, but he pushed her back against the seat, bearing down with all his weight. He held her there, panting, and that's when she realized he was fumbling with the buttons on his jeans. That's when she began to scream in earnest. At the far end of the parking lot, inside the gym, the DJ had just dropped the needle on "See You Later, Alligator." The teenagers from outer space took the floor. Their human peers joined them. The chaperones glanced at their watches. They would be shutting the party down at 11, and looked out over the dance floor. Nobody was listening for screams from the parking lot, and if they had been, they wouldn't have heard anything over the racket of Bill Haley and his comets. Johnny had managed to undo his pants by then. Joan screamed louder, and then, this is the part that puzzles me. The reason that I wish he'd given me his point of view. Tom appeared in the shadows. I still wonder what he was doing out there. None of the aliens smoked, so he hadn't stepped out to sneak a bud. Nor did they drink, so he wasn't outside to sneak one of those either. And he certainly wasn't walking home. Bugtown lay in the opposite direction. Yet there Tom was, and what I keep thinking about even now is that time in English when he whistled Joan out of her stupor. Had he communicated the answer to Mrs. Guest's question as well? It certainly wasn't the kind of answer Joan would have provided on her own, after all. Which makes me wonder if there might have been some connection between them. Some conduit for alien telepathy, for lack of a better word, that had been laid down during Joan's visit to Bugtown. What I wonder is if he knew that Joan was in distress and came to rescue her. Good intentions, right? And all the damage they can do. But the damage didn't come till later. In that moment, there in the dark parking lot, those good intentions paid off in a big way. I'm forever thankful to Tom for what he did next. Joan later told me that she was still fighting, still clawing, still screaming. But Johnny was on the verge of overpowering her. He just clamped a hand over her mouth to shut her up when Tam's 3 massive talons, 8 inches each, punctured the roof of Johnny's beloved 49 Merc, where it curved down to meet the windshield. Johnny cursed and scrambled back against the steering wheel, tugging at his trousers. Joan shoved herself in the other direction and slammed up against the door.